Certainly a very exciting and important day for Beijing and Zhangjiakou bidding for Winter Games 2022. With me in the studio here in Beijing, I'm joined by Mr. Dong Jun, who's a sports commentator and also worked as a volunteer during the 2008 Beijing Summer Olympic Games. Meanwhile, joining me from Washington, D.C., we have Eric Farnsworth, who's a current affairs commentator and vice president of the Council of the Americas. But one of the things that he has been doing is to help the United States of America to bid for the soccer game, which is the World Cup. Of course, the result was not necessarily satisfying, but certainly was quite an experience. I really want to open the discussion, gentlemen, by asking you your personal experience of trying to bid, support your country to bid, and also to serve an Olympic Games. So Dong Jun, what did you learn from your experience as a volunteer serving the beach volleyball during the 2008 Olympic Games? What is it like for you?
Well, the most impressive thing was I was in the best physical shape for many years because I was running between several venues and between our studio right next to the bird's nest. If you remember, we worked side by side, and also I worked in torrential rains because beach volleyball has to be carried out despite whatever weather conditions.
How did that game transform you? And also the people around you?
Well, I was relatively more familiar with the Olympics because I covered the Olympics in Atlanta and I followed the Olympics from 1984. It was for me like a dream come true, but my responsibility was to demonstrate the beach volleyball, for example, relatively unknown to the local spectators and to help them understand the sport better and make them more interactive with the athletes, the players, to make them more active.
Many would draw the comparison actually between the beach volleyball, which is still not necessarily a very popular sport in China, to many of the winter sports. In fact, Beijing, if winning the 2022 Winter Olympic Games, is likely to host. Mr. Farnsworth, I know it is not necessarily the Olympics, but rather the World Cup you were helping. How has that experience of trying to bid for a big game in the world transformed you?
Well, I think there is a public spirit that has to be recognized, an excitement, a sense of eliteness and destiny, if you want to put it that way. Actually, my primary experience with the World Cup in the United States was when we hosted it in 1994, and I participated as a spectator. And it was an excitement to see the world come to the United States. It was an excitement to see that the United States was committed to building soccer, or football as the world calls it, into a national sport. And I think this is an opportunity for Beijing, too, in terms of the Winter Olympics, if Beijing is awarded the opportunity. It should be seen as an opportunity to develop an entire class of sports in China that perhaps hasn't currently existed, or at least not to the same level. We've had that experience in the United States, both on the men and the women's side, and much of that, I think, can be traced back to the successful hosting of the World Cup in 1994. It's been a long process. It's been 20 years. I mean, that was 20 years ago, and it's only now that the United States is really competitive, I think, on the world basis. Certainly on the men. The women are doing fine, but we do have a sense of development and progress and sustainability. I think that's one key lesson to learn.
It is one key lesson to learn and one key experience to share as well. So much when it comes to one city, one country hosting a winter game or a big international sports event. What about Beijing and Zhangjiakou, this joint bid chance this time? Dong Jun, your call.
Well, I think significantly different from the previous bid for the Summer Games for 2008. This time, Beijing finds only one competitor. That's one big difference. And the other, Beijing seems to be the absolute front runner. And I think an important role Beijing needs to play in its bid is to try to refrain from showing any arrogance. It has to show respect for any competitor or competitors. And at the same time, Beijing should be better composed and should show their better understanding about hosting such a mega event at the Olympics. Although the Winter Games will be different from the summer one, there are similarities in hosting them, putting them together. And Beijing should demonstrate their knowledge and their skills and their renewed, their updated understanding about hosting the Olympics in the 2020s
as well.
than back in the early 2000
That's right.
Yeah.
I really love that. But this is a very delicate balance to keep, isn't it, Mr. Farnsworth? I mean, on the one hand, you need to be modest because you need to show the respect for the specific Winter Olympics and also for your competitors. On the other hand, you have to be very strong in your argument and make sure people understand you are the one. It is quite a delicate balance. Your thought?
It is a delicate balance, but it's very consistent with Olympic ideals. I mean, on the field of play, every competitor is trying to be the champion. At the same time, they respect the ability and the effort that their competitor is making. And in fact, if you achieve victory over a qualified competitor, it actually values your own victory much higher. It's a much greater achievement. So I think that this is a balance. I think that Beijing is right to promote its advantages. I think it also has to be humble in some of the issues that the IOC has identified as issues that have to be addressed. And so there is progress here. There is progress that can be made. Neither venue, it must be said, is a perfect venue, but there are advantages to be considered. And I think this is something where some of the humility could come in because in recognizing that things aren't perfect, that allows an opportunity to make changes and make sure that when the games are held in 2022, that they are held in the most successful way possible. This is a success that was achieved in the Beijing Olympics in 2008, and I think it was another lesson that can be favorably applied.
Well, one of the things that people need to really face up to when it comes to questions coming from all over the world for Beijing and Zhangjiakou is the air quality. It is really Beijing's bid for the Winter Games officially started in the year 2013. Over the past 2 years, Beijing, Zhangjiakou been working very hard to meet the IOC standards, especially when it comes to air pollution. Let's take a look at what they've done so far.
Nearly $470 billion have been invested in creating a green, low-carbon economy. In 2014 alone, China shut down nearly 400 polluting companies and took nearly 500,000 old cars off the road. Construction of coal-fired power plants is now banned in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. By 2017, Beijing is aiming to bring down coal use to 10 million tons from 23 million tons in 2012. And it may all be bearing fruit. New figures from Greenpeace show a 13% drop in harmful PM 2.5 particles in the Beijing air in the first quarter of 2015.
This is really good news, also a blessing for residents here in Beijing and Zhangjiakou. But Mr. Dong, let me ask you this. One of the things is whether the host city will be able to have the capability to face up to questions. And Beijing air pollution is a big question mark. Will Beijing be able to, with its efforts, together with Zhangjiakou, to really make that ultimate change and transformation about the air quality? This is a very short period of time of 1 month we're looking at. But we are talking about till the year 2022. That's a long and big promise Beijing and Zhangjiakou is going to make.
Of course, there will still be a lot of uncertainties, affected by global warming, and not only by, the local efforts made in Beijing or the surrounding areas. But I think to show the maturity of the city once who has hosted the Summer Olympics is that people want to demonstrate that this time they are not only sacrificing for the successful putting together of the Olympics, they are also contributing. They are benefiting from hosting the Winter Olympics because for better quality, cleaner air quality will not only benefit the athletes and the organizers, but also benefit in the long run for the local people.
Exactly.
And so with or without the Olympic bid, the Olympic strategy will just be consistent and in line with China's own national interest and strategy.
I think that's a very important point you make because 2008, people talking about let's make sacrifice for the hosting of the Olympic Games. But now we are talking about how can the Games make our lives better, while at the same time we make the Games better. Mr. Farnsworth, this is quite a mind change as well, shall we say, for Chinese this time.
Well, and I think it's an important mind change, and I completely agree with your other guest. The idea would be clearly to host a successful Games, and Beijing has proven that it can do that. But one of the things that the IOC looks for in any bid for the Winter or the Summer Games is the opportunity to actually improve the lives of the citizens and the country as a whole. So we talk about sustainability of sport. We talk about improving the environment. We haven't talked a lot about in this session about infrastructure development and the venues that will be created, and the idea that the infrastructure that will be built will be left behind. That needs to be able to benefit the citizens as well, and there's a real opportunity for that. So this is supposed to be a win-win exercise. It is not intended to be something that a country has to sacrifice to do, and all of the benefits go to the International Olympic Committee. It's supposed to be win-win, and this has been a lesson that we've learned through many years and many different countries hosting. Some have done it more successfully than others, but I think to the extent that the Beijing and Zhangjiakou population and citizens understand that they need to also gain benefit, long-standing benefit from this, I think that's a healthy development, because it means they will make appropriate demands on leaders to make sure that the games improve their lives. I think that's very positive.
One of the things people talk about legacy of any international sports event is whether after event things are going to serve the lives of the local people, and also will that specific country and city be getting better in a sustainable way. I think that's one of the things people are trying to testify as to whether one city is suitable for a game. What about Beijing? Because 2008, after that, we see most of the implementations continues. But at the same time, there are questions about the use of the Olympic venues for the summer game 2008. What about today? And secondly, what about some of the very important measures being taken at the time during 2008 Olympic Games, for example, anti-smoking ban? But today we are seeing smoking picking up, though now we also see a big campaign against the smoking in public places in Beijing. So what do you think about all of these factors, in fact, water down after the games?
Well, I think different from many other, especially developed countries in Europe and North America, China remains on a very fast track, despite the recent slowdown in the economy. Chinese people are still relatively much more open to changes in their lifestyle. And that makes such a bid and hosting of the Winter Games more exciting than many other hosting or bidding countries, because Chinese people are open to new changes. They are more used to changes than staying in
the same.
In the old the status quo. Yes, so that will help make the games more exciting, and the Chinese people are willing to learn new lessons, because Chinese people are relatively better exam takers, test takers. So although China is now trying very hard to develop its own developed model, but before that matures, China is more like a country to be rewarded with a chance to, meet the criteria of a world organization, and with the best performance to put together such a successful event. At the end of it, China is learning new ways of lifestyle. And
one can certainly tell you are very pro for the hosting of the Winter Games, giving us a lot of reasons as to why the Chinese cities should win. Mr. Farnsworth, though, I have to point out, because with some of these scandals recently related to FIFA, it is not surprising that people are becoming a little bit more skeptical about international sports events, even though IOC has nothing to do with the scandals that we talked about. But how to reignite the enthusiasm that the world has about our sports, about international big sports events such as the Olympic Games, it's a big question mark. And how do you think the Beijing would help to answer that question?
Well, this is a critical question, and we have to remember that even as the IOC is considering the bids of Almaty and Beijing, that it is doing so within an overall environment of scandal at FIFA, which is right next door in Lausanne, of course, and we see what happens in the international headlines almost every day, new revelations, etc. I think that you're quite right. These are two separate institutions, two separate activities, but the perception is that international sporting events are somehow tainted by corruption, and many of them apparently are. I'm not suggesting that the IOC is. What I'm suggesting is that the way to combat this is through openness, transparency, to make sure that protocols are followed and not changed at the last minute or,
Right.
or altered in some way, and to make sure that everything is done very fairly and very openly and very transparently. I think it will take time for international sport to recapture the confidence of global populations. But having said that, every international sporting event is viewed in terms of what happens on the field, and that's where the excitement comes. The excitement doesn't come from the venues or the financing or the environmental considerations. Those are important, but the excitement around the games tends to come from the games themselves, and I would anticipate that would continue. That
would definitely continue. There are a lot of criticism, skepticism until the opening ceremony. At the time, everybody will be reignited. But for now, from now until 2022, if Beijing Zhangjiakou get the game, how can we reignite once again to the degree of 2008 and probably even more the Chinese enthusiasm of sports,
they're passionate
about winter sports?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you don't realistically expect that the supporting rate for the Winter Games will be as high as back in 2008, because back then the Chinese people took the Olympics as the glory-winning opportunity. But now they're more rational, and but they are winter sports. They are hosting a relatively new event, different from the Summer Games.
All right.
And even if the supporting rate will be lower than 2008, you still see the biggest gallery of spectators than any other country in the world. I can guarantee that.
We are already thinking about, when should we get the tickets to the games and how should we get it? Thank you so much for the two of you. It's certainly a very big day for Beijing and Zhangjiakou. All the best to them. And thank you very much, Mr. Dong Jun here in Beijing studio. Eric Farnsworth in Washington, D.C. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us.
Thank you very much.